I'm really excited to do this anyway
Oh,
because
thank you. Good.
you know my background. There's a lot of people on the spectrum in my family in all
Yeah.
sorts of ways, but it was very unheard of when I was a kid.
Hmm.
You thought of well, you thought of autism for a start as being somebody rocking in a corner who couldn't communicate at all,
Yeah.
and that's about it. There was no sort of shades of grey. It was that, or you were just a bit weird.
Yeah.
So um, my brother was, as I think we discussed before, diagnosed at 50, and I think you were diagnosed at 50 as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
How,
no clue. No clue.
how did that come up?
Um, so I had a bit of a breakdown at work about last October. I'd got a new job, which was sort of business relationship management, which was really sort of managing the relationship between the customers in the company and the IT service. And you can imagine that was in an IT service that wasn't doing very well. That was very fraught, lots of
Mm,
negative energy. And because I'm naturally like a people pleaser, and I also suffer from sort of rejection sensitive dysphoria, which means I don't take rejection very well. It really, really eats me up. It kind of just was too much for me in the end, and I had a bit of a breakdown, and I went to see the doctor. Um, and the short version is, I had some time off work. I had some treatment for anxiety, which I was originally diagnosed with. I had antidepressants and beta blockers, and the beta blockers helping with the physical symptoms like shaking and things, and the antidepressants obviously making me feel better. And that kind of helped me. And then as I was getting better, I started sort of searching deeper within myself about why I was that way, what caused them to cause this. And as part of all this, I came across a lot of channels on YouTube and things like that that were talking about ADHD. And it was from there, and it started to resonate with me a lot of what they were saying. Silly, you got the obvious things like being sensitive to rejection, people pleasing, but then there's odd things like being clumsy, um, falling off the curb, all this sort of thing, and obsessive hobbies. And the more I thought about it, I thought, hang on a minute, this isn't right. So at that point, I started doing lots and lots of research into it, and you realize that uh, I realize now what I was doing was a hyper focusing, which is something I do a lot. So I really, really focus on something, and I will do it endlessly until I'm satisfied. So at that point, I went to see the GP again, and I basically said I want to be referred for a ADHD diagnosis. And they went through the initial sort of screening questions. Says, yeah, I think we'll do that. So that's how come I I discovered it really. Um, so from then on, I was told by the GP that there was a 3-year waiting list, which I now know is actually quite good. The NHS has a 7-year waiting list in some parts, which is absolutely crazy. And so I investigated the option of doing it privately. And luckily, I had the resources to do that. So by going privately, I was able to get an assessment within a matter of weeks,
right,
and that's how it came about.
right.
So I was diagnosed, I think, in March, early March this year,
Mm.
and that was
And
that.
how? Because I know that, I know a few people have been diagnosed with either ADHD or autism, and for you, how did that change your view of yourself, or did it make sense of things in the past? What was the effect for you?
It it was, and I don't say this lightly. It was a life-changing moment, really, for me. It was an epiphany. It suddenly everything made sense. About why I did things, why I behaved in certain ways. And I realized over the years that I've been compensating and trying to be normal and be like everybody else to fit in. Now, everybody does this to some extent, but it was to such an extent that I am masking who I truly am, and that takes so much energy to do. So because of that, I kind of realized I need to be me. I need to be myself. I need to be authentic. And up until that point, in public anyway, I wasn't being authentic.
Mm.
So I decided, to drop the mask. Let's be me. And from that point on, there's just a feeling of. I mean, initially, I also went through a stage of anger and what's the word? Anger and regret. That,
Mm.
well, if I'd known this all these years ago, how life would have been different. So I went through this kind of anger stage. It's like a bit of a change curve, really. And I think I came to the conclusion in my own time, it took a while, that you cannot change what's happened in the past. There is no point in worrying about what ifs and things like that. It's just hard. It's just soul destroying to do that. And instead I started thinking, well, everything that's happened to me up to this point has led me to where I am.
Mm.
So I wouldn't be having this conversation with you now if I hadn't discovered it, if I had known it
Yeah.
when I was at school, I probably would have behaved very differently all my life, and I probably would have been a very different person to who I am now. That may have been better, it may have been worse. You just can't say. It's almost like if I could go back in time and change things.
Mm.
You can't, and there's no point in even thinking about it.
No.
So I'm very much accepting of it. It's part of me. It's part of what's made me who I am. And not knowing about it all these years has built me up to be what I am today.
Mm. That's really, really a good way of thinking about it. My brother went through a similar thing of being angry that he hadn't been diagnosed and wondering and all of that. Whereas my son was diagnosed much younger as autistic. It was a relief for him because there was a reason why he was like that. He wasn't just mad, bad, or weird. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's you're not just weird. That's the whole thing. You're not just weird. You're not strange. You are just
unique and
unique, like everybody.
yeah.
And everybody's unique. It's no different. It's just I'm unique in different ways. But
Yeah. And also, does give you some superpowers actually.
yes, yes. It comes.
Your hyper focus.
Yeah, it comes at a cost as well. So some of my superpowers, and some people don't like to call them superpowers. I don't like using that term myself, but it does explain it. So, for example, hyperfocus is really when I get really, really involved with something that I enjoy or is interesting or stimulating. I can do it nonstop at the expense of everything else, including eating, going to the toilet. I can do when I'm hyperfocusing. I can do what would take other people, 3 or 4 days to do in half a day sometimes. I've created a training course in 4 or 5 days and things like that recently. I'm nearly finished a book that I started writing 3 weeks ago. So literally, you've got to be careful though, and the secret of it is to control it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can control it, by having some way of getting yourself out of that hyperfocus when you want to, such as things like losing timers is a really, really good idea. There we go. I've just knocked my monitor in my enthusiasm. So there's authenticity for you. Other superpowers, I think I am incredibly perceptive. I have a spider sense that is like no other. If I think something is wrong or something is going to happen, it generally does.
Mm.
It's weird. It is like a spider sense, and I can tell when I'm talking to someone if something is wrong. If I see something happening and I kind of imagine what the next sequence of events will be, and more often than not, it turns out at least to be partially true. So I think that they're my two main ones for me. Is hyperfocus and perception. actually, the other one is it's about empathy. I'm very it's not just about showing sympathy with people. I empathize. I feel it sort of very deeply. So I make quite deep emotional connections with people, which again is really good in some scenarios. But as I found out to my detriment, in the work environment, that also leads to an overwhelming desire to want to please people.
Yeah.
And that's not always appropriate. You can't always please people. You can't always make people happy. And so again, it's a superpower it's a double-edged sword. They're all double-edged swords. And the key to this is to understanding and controlling them.
Yes. I can imagine the perception piece would have been particularly useful in a customer facing role. Definitely.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And you just know when something's wrong. You just, no matter how much you try to deny it or internally or make something else, it just, you just know. And I've learned, go with my gut feeling all the time.
Yeah, I think that's true. Entrepreneurs generally tend to have good gut feelings, so it's a good
That's good.
superpower that you've got there. Because, and that leads me into what I was going to talk about next, which was obviously you were diagnosed, and then you made what some people might say is quite a bold move to leave the safety of corporate life and start up on your why and how's it going?
It wasn't easy. It's not something I had envisaged doing. Even when I was diagnosed, it wasn't something that I even considered. I'm very risk averse as well. However, some of the experiences that I had when I was at work kind of got me thinking that this isn't right for me. This isn't going to work. Now I know I cannot go back to who I was. I cannot go back to that world where somebody tells me what to do. Somebody gives me vague instructions. I go to endless meetings that I'm not interested in. And I thought, if I go back to this, I'm just going to go back. I'm just going to revert and I'm going to be at the doctor's again. And the more I saw people on social media and in other places advocating for ADHD and neurodiversity, the more I thought, this is me. This is what I should be doing. Every personality test I've ever done, yeah, that sort of thing, and Tetramap, it says, wow, you should be a coach. You should be working with people, not IT. I really was the kind of an odd one to be working in IT, and I always gravitated towards people. I've always been there, sort of mentoring people, advising people, guiding and leading, because I was quite a senior leader when I finished. So I thought, and it came to me one day, I was sitting in the living room having my tea, and it just came to me, you could do this. You could actually help people using your story and your skills and your knowledge that find themselves in the position I'm in. And at that point, I knew I wanted to be an ADHD coach. I knew I wanted to be an advocate. I knew it was the right thing to do. And I had no doubt in my mind at that point in time that I could do it. So that was actually a single point in time when I made that decision. And I remember it to this day. But it wasn't immediate, if you know what I mean. It kind of, on reflection, this is what but it hit me, and that was it.
And that was it. You had to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. And I love the name ADH, ADH adaptive.
ADHD active, yeah.
ADHD active, yeah. It's so where did the name come from, and what's your vision?
I was looking for a catchy name that was short and unique, and something that if you search for it, you wouldn't find it anywhere else.
Right.
And this is true. You search for adaptive, you get about 6 results, and they're all me.
Yeah.
I I don't know. I played around with a few ideas in my head. I had
Mm,
a bit of help from ChatGPT with some suggestions, and it kind of inspired me. And I actually just came up with a AD adoption. There was various ones that I played around with, but in the end, I set up a little group of friends who sort of helped me and mentor me as I called it my ADHD rambles. It's a Facebook group with a few trusted people, and I said, "Hey, everybody, what do you think of adaptive?" And they
mm,
all loved it. So I went and did some research. I Googled it, checked nobody else had that name, check it wasn't used anywhere else. And it wasn't. So I thought, right, I'm going to nab that domain.
yeah.
So I did straight away. And that's really how it was born. And the idea is it's got ADHD in it, and it kind of brings together adaptation and adapting and brings it all together into one. And what the mission of adaptive is to help people adapt and understand. Um, and I really like it. Um, it also is really good because you can add other things to it. So I've got adaptive TV, which is my YouTube channel. I've got what have I got? Adaptive coaching, um, adaptive learning, and adaption, which is more of the sort of consultancy type of thing. So it kind of lets me play on those words quite a lot.
Right. And so where do you see it? Where would you like in 5 years' time? Where would you like to be?
I don't have huge ambitions. My main ambition is that I am helping people, that people actually trust me to help them. Um, and I get my energy really from that, from people, from working with people and understanding them and, helping them understand themselves. So I want to be doing that through coaching and working with businesses. Um, and this morning, for example, I was at a networking event and it was talking to some people in new startups, and they were saying, well, hey, I don't think it's really relevant for you to come and talk to me about neurodiversity because I've only got 2 people working for me. I'm very small. And of course, that's given me the idea, well, actually, that's exactly the sort of time you should be doing it. That's when you should be educating people, and they can then develop and adapt their neurodiversity policy and bring it in from the start, because by doing it at the start, it becomes very easy. It will be there automatically as they grow. So I think that thing about helping businesses, helping individuals who find themselves in my position, helping businesses start up and, embrace neurodiversity. And I also want to do a little bit of advocacy. So I would like to have a social media presence and, creating content that people trust and like, and not this funny daft stuff that you see on TikTok, but, serious thought provoking stuff that actually helps people.
Mm,
Um, I don't want to be rich and famous, but I want to be trusted and recognized for who I am, pretty
mhm.
much. So
Brilliant. Well, I'm sure you're taking the right steps to get there. So it occurs to me there might be a lot of people in the sort of position that you and my brother were in, maybe not knowing, maybe knowing something might be wrong, but not really knowing and not having been diagnosed. What would you say to them? And then separately, what would you say to somebody who's just been diagnosed?
yeah. So I think for somebody that's just been diagnosed, no matter what age they are, it can be quite a shock, and it can be quite scary because it's you've been told there's something wrong with your brain in effect, and I would say there's not something wrong with your brain. It just works in a different way to other people's. No, everybody's brain works differently.
Mm,
Uh, ADHD, I like to think of as a set of characteristics,
mhm,
like a personality test we talked about earlier. It's almost like a set of personality characteristics, and if you bolt those onto those tests, you actually realize, well, this is just a different type of person. And don't think about ADHD as something to be cured. Think of it as something which you can embrace and use those strengths that it gives you. And it's very much all about controlling them. And nobody's alone. There's lots and lots of help out there. Um, so, embrace it, go with it, be yourself. And for people who haven't been diagnosed but think they might have it, again, having it, it's such a unhelpful phrase. And you don't need to be diagnosed formally in order to embrace those traits that you might have, like being, self-aware, being a people pleaser, hyper focus. You can embrace and use those no matter who you are, whether or not you're diagnosed. And again, don't be afraid of it. And if you want to say, because you believe you have got ADHD, then I phone you be honest about it with whoever you meet, because I don't like labels, but it helps. It will help individuals understand themselves a little bit more. And it also does help in some scenarios where it does help people understand you too. But again, I don't like labels because we don't go around saying, well, you're an introvert, you're a bit strange, aren't you? It's kind of, except it's think of it as being introverted or extroverted or shy or outgoing. It's along those lines, really. And if you think you might have those characteristics, it sometimes helps to get a formal diagnosis, because it helps me, for example, help me sort of get closure and understand the journey that I needed to go on. If it's very, very severe as well, you do need a diagnosis to get access to medication and things like that, obviously. But think about it very carefully. It can help in a number of ways, but it's not essential either. And neither, whether you're diagnosed or not, are you obliged to tell anyone about it. It's a personal choice. I chose very much to be open and honest about it with people, and not be ashamed of it. But some people prefer to keep it quieter and keep it inside. But even if you choose to do that, I think internally you've got to embrace it and understand it, and understand why you are doing things the way you do them. And just by understanding it, I think, for example, masking.
Yes.
By understanding that you're doing it, it becomes a little bit more manageable, a bit more acceptable and controllable. But I think, don't be afraid to accept it. Don't be afraid to go with it.
And to help people who think that they maybe it applies to them, I've heard that there are differences between the way that things exhibit for men generally and women. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, generally in childhood, at least, boys tend to exhibit there's two types of ADHD. There's the hyperactive type and the inattentive type. Young boys tend to exhibit characteristics of the hyperactive type. So they're fidgeting, they can't sit still, they're always interrupting people, that sort of thing. And they historically, and even back in my day, before ADHD was even diagnosable, that was kind of recognized because they tended to be disruptive and got noticed. Girls, more often than not, have the other type of presentation, which is inattentive. And that means that they are actually hyperactive, but it's all internal. And I have that type of presentation. I have always been inattentive rather than hyperactive externally. But because of that, they tend to be, they're the sort of, they'll sit, they'll work, they'll try and work diligently, they'll not make a fuss. Very often they actually do quite well at school academically. They might be the sort of person that wants to help the teacher and all that sort of thing. But internally, there's a struggle going on in their mind, because you've got all of the other symptoms, like lack of being able to focus on things and easily distracted. So and because and again, I think there's probably more masking goes on in the inattentive type, and that goes unnoticed because it's this intuitive thing where you want to be like everybody else. So it's kind of a vicious circle there. But it is true. There is it does manifest differently, and it's not the same. There's no typical ADHD person, male or female, but more often than not, the boys tend to have the hyperactive type. I think later in life, they mask it so much that they actually then move towards being inattentive. I'm actually was diagnosed as combined, which is the third type, which is you have both. But my hyperactivity is in my brain. I hear all these noises. I can't concentrate. I get distracted. So yeah, but the result of all that is there are probably many more females who are undiagnosed than males.
Yes.
Even now at schools and things like that.
Yeah. My daughter was, it was not a shock, but it was surprising to me when she said she was going
Yeah.
because, like you said, she did very well at school, and all of it. So yeah.
So
yeah.
that is actually one thing. When I told my family and friends, they kind of didn't believe it. And my mum still is actually she's quite upset really, because she thinks she missed all this and she didn't really believe it was true because I was just quiet and normal and I just got on with things. But I wasn't. I had really strange hobbies. I wanted to be alone most of the time. I I was doing things like fiddling with things and even things like just constantly blinking my eyes, but I kept it all quiet and things like that. So there's so many little signs there that people miss. And yeah, other people have responded mostly, well, I don't believe that. Other people say, oh yeah, I can see it. I can really see it. And I thought this years ago. And I think, well, thanks for telling me. So there's a couple of there's a couple of responses to that really, but
well, I think the more you talk about it, and I think it's great that you're open and honest and talk to people about it, because there's not enough information out there. It's quite difficult for somebody to find the real information as opposed to all the hype. And like before social media, there was literally no information, and then with social media, there's a lot of information, but a lot of it's very dubious. So how do you know? How do you know what to believe and what not to believe?
I think it's easier for me. I think someone that's been here, I know what's just hype and what's there to get clicks. And then someone occasionally you see somebody that says something that really connects. Like there's something about somebody once, 10 things that say you might have ADHD. And there were things coming out like I'm constantly catching, my trousers on the door latch as I go through. I've never ever heard that before, but I thought, jeepers, I do that all the time. So I think it's difficult for people that haven't. I think there's some truth in all of it, but it doesn't define who you are. All these quirky things you do, it doesn't define who you are. It's such a big thing, and it has so many different impacts. I think, yeah. How do you know what's the truth? I don't think you can say what's the truth and what's not the truth. If somebody believes that this is a result of ADHD, then it probably is for them. So I think it's just go with your gut feeling, really. If you see things which you identify with, then yeah. If you just think it's funny and ha ha ha, then it's probably a bit exaggerated to get clicks. But it's down to the individual, really. If you connect with something someone's saying, it's true. If you make that connection and you recognize it's true. And like I say, different people have a different experience. Everybody is different. So just because I think somebody who does these top 10 things that say you've got ADHD, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is just so stereotypical. This is so, it's just, but for those people who do those things, it's true. So I don't think in terms of that sort of thing, you really can get to the truth. It's very subjective. It's very personal.
Mm.
Even when you get into sort of the medical side, with the experts can't really agree with each other about what the actual cause is. They can see certain things happening in the brain, and that's how come they worked out what medication can do and how that helps. But the actual underlying causes and mechanics of it is still not really known.
Mm.
Some experts say, well, it's not a real thing at all. Some say it is a real thing, and it's very, very much an emerging thing. And there's lots of research going on. So I think watch this space on the actual scientific research, which is peer tested, peer reviewed, and all that sort of thing, is the way to go. And I think going forward, we'll get a better understanding of it, maybe different treatment regimes, or not. But yeah, there's a lot of dubious information out there. I think, and if you're reading something about, like this magic mushroom or whatever can help you, then that probably is, do a little bit of fact checking.
Mm.
If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
That's life.
It's like private clinics. There was a whole thing about private clinics, not so long ago on the BBC, rogue clinics and all that. And yes, there probably are. I haven't come across them personally, but I made sure when I went to that private clinic, I researched the clinician, I researched the company. I found out he was on the board of directors of one of the NHS trusts in London, and he'd done all this research, and he was quite a well-respected academic. I can see how people could be tricked into, going to Fred's ADHD clinic up the road and getting their worthless piece of paper, which can be quite dangerous. So I think, and actually, if you've got ADHD, it's very often a trait anyway, is make sure of the facts, make sure you understand what you're getting into, and make sure it's actually likely to be correct.
Yeah. Mm. Good advice for everything in life. That
Yeah.
there are lots
Always
of
check.
dubious, all sorts of in all sorts of businesses and fields. There's some
Yeah,
dubious.
it's like scams, email scams, and this sort of thing.
They're getting cleverer and cleverer on the email scams. You have to be very clever, very, very
Yeah.
cautious.
Oh, they're quite good. There's always a few telltale signs, but you kind of, again, for me, I guess it's my spider sense. If something's not right, I can usually tell.
Mm.
But how does everybody? I would just say that a lot of the trivialization of it that goes on social media, it doesn't help the
Mm.
stigma that's attached to it. There's a lot of stigma with ADHD, and that's why a lot of people won't tell anyone.
Mm.
And this, there are a lot of characters that, they make the most of it. They exaggerate. They probably don't exaggerate it, but they use their ADHD to sell themselves and to get views and likes and all that. But there's a difference between, there's a good way of doing it, which is the informative way, the educational way. And there are lots of really, really good channels and influencers out there. And there was one in particular, which really inspired me, and it was a TEDx talk.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lady called How to ADHD, but some fantastic resources on. She's been doing it for quite a while. She's got some fantastic resources, really, really helpful. And there's a vast difference between that and, these 2-minute TikToks that just make laugh and joke, which is entertaining and all that. But that side doesn't help the stigma. It just pushes out the impression that people with ADHD and neurodivergence are strange and weird, and it's something to be scared of or laugh at, and that side doesn't help at all.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
No. So, if an employer was looking at, how to, whether they have anybody with the ADHD, or maybe they see this talk or another talk and they suddenly think, well, actually, maybe I do have somebody with ADHD. What would your advice be to that?
to be fair, it's more than likely that even if they haven't thought that, they already do have employees who are neurodivergent, not just ADHD, because most people either aren't aware that they may be, or they choose to keep it quiet. But I think there's two things. One, again, do your research. Don't be swayed by all the social media hype and the stigma that goes with it. You need to treat people as individuals and sort of look at them all individually. If you've got somebody that comes and says, they've got ADHD, they disclose it, then apart from anything else, you're legally obliged, to make any reasonable adjustments, because ADHD, autism, these are all considered or can be considered disabilities under the 2010 Disability Act in the UK. So you've got legal protection. So you've got a legal obligation to provide them with accommodations in the same way you would, somebody that's in a wheelchair or whatever. So there's that side. And there is lots of information out there, and it's something I'm working on actually, is sort of packs of information for employers about what they can do. There are some other simple things that how they can offer support. So for example, they can offer reasonable adjustments, which aren't necessarily big or scary. That could be, the ability to work from home, which is fairly common these days anyway now, luckily. Moving people around in the office, making sure they've got clear instructions when they're given a task, having peer mentors, so having somebody work with them. There's all sorts of things that can be done. There's also assistive technologies and software, like sort of planning, little apps you can get on your phone that help you plan. So it's very much all about structure. If the problem is organization, it's all about clear instructions and structure and deadlines. That's a good thing. If somebody with ADHD, for me, unless I have a deadline, it doesn't happen. And I'll leave it to the last minute every time. But that deadline of having something to do and to please someone is enough to get me to do that job and do it well. The other thing I would say is you can support them by talking to them about the Access to Work scheme, which is a UK government grant that is available for people with disabilities, that is designed really to help them stay in work. And that can pay for things like ADHD coaching, virtual assistants to help you with your organization, assistive software. It can help with things like costs of transport to work if you can't get public transport. And this is a grant. It can, they can be awarded up to £60,000. I myself got about £6,000 because this year. So I've been through that process and understand how it works. So that really paid for ADHD coaching and a piece of support software which helps with planning, but it also has like a crisis line. You press a button on the app and they'll ring you up and help you. So there's all those sorts of things you can get. And individuals who apply for this, basically what would happen in that scenario if it was done through work, the individual has to apply for it. They don't have to have a diagnosis. As part of it, you have an assessment that sort of assesses what your capabilities are. And then there's kind of a discussion between the individual and the advisors about what assistance might help them. And at the end of the day, if that gets granted, what happens is they get a letter that says, right, you got X amount of money, and these are the bits of software, and these are the support that you can have. And if you work for an organization, what will happen is the organization can purchase that, and then they can basically get the money refunded from that grant. So it doesn't cost the organization anything. It also can be used by self-employed people like myself. You don't have to be employed by somebody else. You can be self-employed, in which case the money comes directly to me and I get it that way. The other thing is it also covers training or apprenticeships. So it can be used for people who are just starting out in work as well. You do have to be in work or just starting work, but it's a really, really powerful, useful source of support.
Mm.
And it's particularly useful to have that conversation with your employer, or both at that time. So if somebody's diagnosed, go and talk to your employer. If they don't mention access to work funding, you can, and it basically helps them make those reasonable adjustments.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of companies don't know that that's available.
They don't. It's really, really misunderstood, and nobody really knows about it. But in most cases, people can use that to access ADHD coaching, and it doesn't cost them a penny.
Amazing. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for that conversation.
Okay.
Really interesting. And
Oh,
yeah, wish you well with everything.
thank you. I really enjoyed talking and sort of sharing my experiences. So I hope it's been of some help.
Thank you.